Right, so Keir Starmer's abhorrent anti-migrant speech and the fallout from it is still causing Labour irreparable damage. It now earning itself a Rivers of Blood style name, being widely referred to now as the Island of Strangers speech. A speech where Starmer outed himself not as someone to stand up for migrant rights and making the moral case for migration, as he stood on a platform for election to do, but to continue to attack and demonise migrants instead. Starmer, the petty, vindictive liar and a racist, and never will he get away from such accusations against others again, and compounded in my view by his support for Israel against the people of Gaza as well, because where he deems migrants to be unwelcome here, having caused incalculable damage as he put it, Israel are fine occupying land illegally as they have done since 1967, the land of others. So he can add hypocrisy to his racism as well. But at last someone has said it. At last someone has pointed out that where Starmer is copping all the flak here, he isn't really the one in the driver's seat at all, and never has been. And Zarah Sultana, suspended from Labour for daring to vote against keeping kids in poverty, has clearly got no illusions about getting the Labour whip back, because she just named the real power in Downing Street on live TV. And if you don't know about this guy, it's way past time you did.
When you heard that phrase, an island of strangers, how did you feel?
I was shocked. A Labour Prime Minister literally taken a quote from the Rivers of Blood speech, which Enoch Powell delivered in my hometown of Birmingham. I couldn't actually believe it. And I know that there are some efforts to pretend that this is just a coincidence, just something randomly picked out of air. But as a politician, I can tell you that you don't just get a speech on the day. It is drafted, I imagine, in Downing Street by numerous people. It is probed over, there are edits made, it is fact-checked. So for me, someone had Enoch Powell's speech on a PDF and was picking quotes, and that's how that phrase was in that speech, and that to me is highly concerning. You tweeted today, everyone knows exactly who that person is. Who is it? Well, it shouldn't come as a surprise, but I believe that that is Morgan McSweeney.
He's the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff.
Absolutely, and we know that no decision in Downing Street takes place without his approval, so he definitely would have had sign-off, but the Prime Minister himself approved of those words and delivered that speech, so the buck lies with the Prime Minister.
Obviously, Morgan McSweeney's not here, as we can all see, so we don't know if that's true or not.
Right, so that was Victoria Derbyshire's interview with suspended Labour MP Zarah Sultana on Newsnight last night, and frankly, if McSweeney isn't behind that speech, as Sultana suggests, then I'll eat my shorts. He is the real power in Downing Street. But what Sultana did there was something no other mainstream media moment has ever adequately done, and that is, it peeled back the facade of leadership in Britain to reveal the true power behind Number 10. That name is still largely unknown outside of Westminster, but it should become a household name in the same way Dominic Cummings did, because it's the same behind-the-scenes machinations going on here. The name Starmer should become synonymous with the name McSweeney, just as Cummings did with Johnson. According to Sultana, Keir Starmer's horrendous Island of Strangers speech, justifiably condemned for invoking Enoch Powell-esque racist rhetoric as it did, could not have gone ahead without McSweeney's sign-off. In her view there, nothing does. In that one sentence, Sultana exposed not just a political strategy, but an entire shadow governance structure shaping the nation in silence, just as Dominic Cummings was doing for Boris Johnson. It is the same thing. Nothing has changed, therefore. The British public have got to become a lot more familiar with Morgan McSweeney, urgently so, given the direction he is de facto leading Labour in, because Starmer is just a puppet. He wears the Brill Cream Borefest like a glove. McSweeney's fingerprints are all over the political and moral decline of the Labour Party, and far from being merely a backroom advisor, Morgan McSweeney is really the real Prime Minister here. But he's not infallible, and just as he's made mistakes before, he's made another one here. The catastrophic strategy of mimicking Nigel Farage has backfired. It will only drive voters to Reform UK, and it will continue to alienate core, once upon a time, Labour supporters. Morgan McSweeney's ascent is one of modern politics' most chilling case studies in power without scrutiny. He's been around for decades and is still pretty much unknown. McSweeney began as a relatively obscure Blairite Labour organiser and strategist, rising through party ranks by building connections and crafting influence networks rather than through any form of public mandate at all. He helped co-found Labour Together, a contradiction in terms of a group if ever there was one, since no faction within Labour has done more to tear the party apart. But that became the go-to place to be for the Labour right, who only cared about power and control of the Labour Party, seeking to wrest the party back away from the Corbyn leadership and put the left of the party back in their place. McSweeney's mission at heart, therefore, has always been a simple one. Purge the party of its left-wing ideals and repurpose the party into a sanitised, power-at-all-costs vehicle for the establishment. McSweeney's model was not about policies, not about vision, which you might have noticed Starmer has always been rather short of, but about control. Always about control. His playbook replaced hope with petty machination, ideology with optics, and grassroots activism with ruthless centralisation of all of the party's power structures into London, into Westminster. The Gabriel Pogrund and Patrick Maguire book Get In, which was the sequel to their analysis of the downfall of Corbyn called Left Out, lays bare McSweeney's dominance though. Despite being a book supposedly about Keir Starmer's rise to power, Starmer himself actually gets rendered to being a secondary figure in it. The authors explicitly state McSweeney isn't a part of the Starmer project, he is the Starmer project. In other words, we have a Prime Minister who is not, and never has really been, in charge. So Zarah Sultana's claim that this speech could not have occurred without McSweeney's approval is almost certainly true. And terrifying as that is, Derbyshire disappointingly opined that McSweeney was not there to answer for that. But then, he never is. In that appalling speech, Keir Starmer suggested that immigration had caused incalculable damage to Britain, describing migrants therefore as a destabilising force that threatens the social fabric of this nation, despite this being a nation built on multiculturalism. So the outrage was, of course, going to be immediate. Politicians, journalists, activists and academics alike drew immediate parallels to Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech, a speech that saw Powell suspended from the Tory party the next day that he gave when he gave it in 1968, but coming now from a Labour leader, though Labour in name only, and of course he'll only get lauded for it by the hangers-on. Alternative media, notably however, slammed it. Here's an excerpt from Counterfire's coverage. Starmer is clearly trying to block off Reform's racist appeal, but he has enhanced its appeal. His immigration plan was immediately seized on by Reform's Richard Tice's Our Policy, and Farage was able to call it out as a knee-jerk reaction to our success. For people who voted Reform because of immigration, Starmer just confirmed their judgment. Every racist act that spilled innocent blood thereafter can be linked to Powell's idea of defending the nation from immigrant hordes. Just last year, the country saw the worst race riots in decades, in areas that had all recorded a high vote for Reform and their racist propaganda. And now Starmer and his equally obnoxious Home Secretary Yvette Cooper are feeding the hatred by claiming that we are becoming an island of strangers. Many of us have been nursed, educated, befriended and entertained by people from migrant backgrounds. To blame the real divisions in society on migrants is pure scapegoating. Others, like Richard Murphy in his Funding the Future blog, noted how personally offensive this was to millions of families, including his own, who have made immense contributions to British society. With a name like Murphy, it likely comes as no surprise he spoke of his Irish grandfather. He described Starmer's language as a disgrace that had reduced decades of national service, cultural richness and economic input to xenophobic scapegoating. As for the mainstream media, well, some have sadly leapt to Starmer's rescue. Sky News' Beth Rigby, in what can only be described as a tortured act of damage control, tried to convince readers of a piece that she's put out that Starmer's speech was inspired by Roy Jenkins rather than Powell or Farage, a splitter who sabotaged the Labour left. I can't imagine why Starmer finds him inspirational. But in this instance, it supposedly comes from something Jenkins said in 1966, which was, "Let there be no suggestion that immigration in reasonable numbers is a cross that we have to bear, and no pretence that if only those who have come could find jobs back at home, our problems would be at an end. But it does not follow that we can absorb them without limit. We have to strike a balance. That is what we are trying to do, and I feel that we have been reasonably successful in recent months. We cannot lay down absolute numerical quantities, but I think that we have struck a reasonable balance, and also that in the past year we have made substantial progress towards producing a healthier atmosphere in terms of integration on both sides amongst both the indigenous and the immigrant community." Yeah, but Powell said they found themselves strangers in their own country, and Starmer said we risk becoming an island of strangers, and Jenkins, well, he never mentioned islands or strangers. Nobody is buying this load of chuff, Beth, but nice try. Starmer's attempted imitation of Farage and his ilk has served only to legitimise Reform UK more and push more voters into their arms. The backlash by people opposed to that language, particularly amongst young voters, progressives, ethnic minorities, has been swift and unforgiving, losing Labour still more voters. And the tragedy is not just in the language of the speech, but in its fundamental dishonesty. Migrants have not caused damage to Britain at all. They've held it together. From the NHS to public transport, agriculture to academia, Britain's infrastructure rests on the backs of migrant workers and has done for the last century or more. They are the doctors, the nurses, the builders, the carers, the researchers, the teachers, the delivery drivers. They are taxpayers and community builders, and now they are being told they're unwelcome, that they damage British society, and it's bull. Starmer's speech was a betrayal of everything Labour once stood for. It certainly does not stand for any of that now with him in charge. This was not simply policy error, it was moral collapse. One that began not with Starmer himself, but with the man whispering in his ear, or handing him his to-do list, as might be more accurate, Morgan McSweeney. To fully grasp the authoritarianism McSweeney represents, here's a good example. Consider his crusade against the Canary, the left-wing news outlet that dared to challenge the Labour establishment attacks on Jeremy Corbyn at the time. As reported by the Canary itself and other outlets as well, McSweeney allegedly orchestrated an elaborate campaign to destroy that platform. In part, the driver behind the anti-Semitism campaign against Corbyn. This was McSweeney's brainchild, incidentally. And this is why he's also known as the architect of Corbyn's downfall. But he went after the Canary too, trusted by the left on equal par as they were with The Guardian at the time, where McSweeney from behind the scenes was pressuring allies, manipulating narratives, and working through party networks to defund and delegitimise the Canary, also while kissing up to the Guardian, who of course became one of the main drivers of anti-Semitism attack stories against Corbyn at that time. This goes far beyond political strategy. This was an all-out assault on press freedom and on democracy itself by confecting a crisis beyond the scale of true anti-Jewish racism, weaponising it for political ends. It reveals McSweeney's desire for absolute control and his capacity to carry out ideological purges from behind the scenes, with others providing the front from politicians to the mainstream media. You can also imagine he wrote Beth Rigby's article for her by this point, can't you? That a man like McSweeney can wield this much unchecked power is a real political and democratic crisis. He is unelected, he is unaccountable, and he's going unchallenged. The comparison to Dominic Cummings is inevitable, and it fits. But even Cummings, for all of his power, was known, ended up being scrutinised, was eventually driven out by public exposure. McSweeney has faced no such reckoning. He is a literal ghost in the Labour Party machine, shaping our politics while avoiding all of the responsibility that should come with that power. So this has to end if democracy truly means anything. Power must be visible, knowable, and accountable. So McSweeney needs to be dragged into the light. What Starmer and McSweeney have constructed is not a movement, it's a machine. It does not offer hope, it merely avoids risk. It does not build coalitions, it calculates them. This machine sees immigration not as a human story, but as a polling problem. It sees public services not as rights, but as liabilities. It sees voters not as people, but demographics. It is a machine that purged Corbyn, crushed internal dissent, and now betrays its own supporters with xenophobic pandering to Reform UK. McSweeney may have engineered a short-term victory in terms of political centralisation and the success the Starmer machine has had up until this point, up until he became Prime Minister. But if, as Zarah Sultana suggests, he is behind all of this, but at the cost of everything the Labour Party was built on and represented, we are allowing our politics, our government even, it would seem, to be dictated by a man hiding behind a curtain. Just as Cummings was exposed, so too must McSweeney be made to answer. Parliament, the press and the public must demand transparency on this. Sultana's bravery must be the beginning, not an isolated act. If we believe in democracy, then Morgan McSweeney must come under scrutiny and held to account. For the migrant families insulted by Starmer's speech, for the journalists and MPs who have been silenced, for the voters betrayed by a party they once believed in. Morgan McSweeney is not part of the problem. He literally is the problem, and it needs to be resolved. Meanwhile, Starmer's speech looks like it is having far-reaching electoral consequences too. His determination that if you live in the UK, you must speak English has had Welsh and Scottish voters up in arms. and all ahead of Holyrood and Senate elections to coincide with next year's locals. English is not the only language on these islands, and you'd have thought Starmer would have realised that. Not smart, not funny. What was Morgan McSweeney thinking? Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, sort of spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.